Good morning, everyone. My name is Betty Cruz. I'm the president and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. We are excited to be here today with Dr. Dupre, and to learn about the important work that he's been doing. We at the council have pivoted to bring to you virtual programs since a few weeks back. The series is called Building Back Better, and we've taken this inspiration from the World Bank and a report that they released a couple years back on how you build back better after a disaster. And as we will talk through with the doctor today, there is much to learn and much that is happening as we figure out this race to a vaccine as it relates to COVID-19. And I want to also hear from the doctor and his experience and how he came to Pittsburgh in his journey. But first off, again, I just want to welcome you. It's been my great pleasure to join the council team at the beginning of the year. Never expecting this ride to look quite how it's looked in a global health pandemic, economic pandemic, and the racial justice uprisings that we are all a part of in this moment in our history. And all of this intersects as we talk about health equity and the importance of this race to a vaccine. So again, thank you all so much for being here today. Please use the chat feature to ask any questions as we go through the conversation with Dr. Dupre. I have many questions for him, but we're going to be turning to you all as well. And let's get this show started. So Dr. Paul Dupre serves as the Jonas Salk Chair for Vaccine Research at the University of Pittsburgh, while simultaneously directing Pitt's Regional Biocontainment Laboratory, a high-security facility embedded in the Center for Vaccine Research that allows scientists to safely contain and examine potentially dangerous pathogens. Before Pitt, Dr. Dupre was a professor of microbiology at the Boston University School of Medicine and a director of bioimaging at BU's National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratory. Specializing in measles and mumps viruses, Dr. Dupre also studies barriers that stop viruses jumping from animals to humans. This is going to be a conversation with Dr. Dupre, and again, I have some questions, and I know that we might be using the screen to bring some of his work to life. But why don't we start, Dr. Dupre, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Paul Dupre. We'll kill the doctor, Betty, from now on. We've got to know each other well as we prepared for this. And as you say, this should be a conversation. And actually, I really encourage it to be a conversation with all of your participants. It's really great for me to see the number of people who are listening in right now. And this is just a great privilege for me to speak to a wider community of people in the city that I only came to just over a year and a half ago. As you say, I came from Boston. Prior to that, I am from Northern Ireland, and I studied in the United Kingdom, just outside London. I've always really been interested in emerging infectious diseases and viruses that are really transmissible. I started working off with a virus that many people might not have heard of because it doesn't infect humans, it infects animals. Foot and mouth disease virus, a super infectious agent. And that's what I did my PhD on. I had to work in biocontainment because we don't protect people from foot and mouth. We protect the environment from foot and mouth. That got me interested in biocontainment. Then I became interested in the most infectious human virus on the planet. That's measles virus. And of course, measles is a really important disease. Whenever I started working on that virus, in the whole world, there were over 1 million children dying of measles each year. And of course, what intrigued me about that was this is a vaccine preventable disease. So you go from highly transmissible, biocontainment, measles virus, human disease, but a vaccine. And then I became interested in the other side of the disease coin, vaccines, interventions. And what better place to think about vaccines, to do vaccines, to work in the Center for Vaccine Research, to lead the Center for Vaccine Research in Pittsburgh. a place with a tremendous history in vaccines. It's a word that we in this city are really familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, this series, this conversation in particular, as part of our Building Back Better series, is focused on Pittsburgh Ingenuity because of the work that you're leading and the work that Pittsburgh has led in the world as it relates to vaccine research. Obviously, famously through Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. And one of my favorite quotes of his, when asked if he would patent it, he said, "Could you patent the sun?" I don't know what level of inspiration.
I mean, that's really interesting. That's a super famous quote. What was that built on? That was built on the fact that people gave dimes. I'm not sure if everyone on the call is familiar with this, but the March of Dimes is incredibly important in funding the research that led to the poliovirus vaccine. All those envelopes, you see some of the images of them arriving, and people from all over the country sending those dimes. That resource, that enabled, that got us to, as you say, ingenuity. Ingenuity, creativity, call it what you wish. If you enable people who are inherently creative to come up with solutions to problems, and if the public own it because they resource it, and the March of Dimes is one way of doing that, but of course funding basic science, funding translational science by the NIH, it's another way that we do it in the here and now. And of course then we've got other organizations like Gates and CEPI and all of these different important organizations outside of Pennsylvania. And then you've got the history of Pittsburgh. Right. Has foundations, so the Pittsburgh Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, the Hillman Family Foundation, the David Scaife Foundation. You know, this really interesting public-private partnership as a way of developing new interventions. And pretty much that's what's happening now. We're using a lot of money from the public purse to pay for the novel vaccines that are being pushed through as fast as we can.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. And again, Pittsburgh's role, obviously the work that we're doing locally, but our impact in the world, not just in this movement or this research over years and years, but in this particular moment. And again, the race to the vaccine, which is the conversation that we're focused on here today. Can you share more on what the process is of making a vaccine, is this process different when we're talking about COVID-19 as compared to some of the other examples that you were sharing?
Yeah, it's really different. We're in a completely different environment, 2020, compared to what we were in the 1950s. I've said it before, I say it again, the types of vaccines that we can make are things that Salk would only have been able to dream of. He was super creative in his day using the technologies that he had access to. But the world is a very different place 65 years later. And it's really interesting that the vaccines that are in development, the ones that are being pushed through, are absolutely different to the ones that Salk was working on. So Salk developed a chemically inactivated vaccine, and Sabin, his competitor at the time, he developed a biologically attenuated or weakened vaccine. So those were the two pretty standard ways to do that in the 50s. Now we can bring to bear an arsenal of biotechnology. We have DNA, we have RNA, we have proteins, we have viruses, we have retuned viruses, we have systems in which we can play around with the biology of many, many different things. We can express proteins in bacteria and yeast and cells. You know, it's just like keep on going. And that's why we don't have just 2 or 3 candidate vaccines in development across the world. We've hundreds now. We're getting close to 200 candidate vaccines being developed for COVID-19.
Great. So can you share a little bit, pull back the curtain a little bit more even, and let us know what the Center for Vaccine Research is doing towards developing the COVID-19 vaccine?
So what we are interested in is in that big array of new types of vaccines that I just mentioned. We are interested in platform-based vaccines. What do we mean by platform? Well, another word is stage in an auditorium. So think of the Heinz auditorium. Think of that stage or that platform. The stage stays the same, but the actors change. And a platform vector vaccine, that basic vector stays the same, but depending on the disease that you're trying to treat, you bring in a different actor onto the stage, and that actor is what gets seen by the audience. Okay, so that's the analogy. Platform, actor, audience. The audience is the immune system. The actor, or in this instance, the bad actor, is SARS coronavirus 2. That's the virus that causes the disease COVID. And this platform, the stage that we use, is a wonderful vaccine that has been safely administered to billions of people. That's the measles vaccine. So measles, the stage, SARS, the actor, and then the immune system, people coming to make antibodies against the SARS coronavirus. So I say SARS coronavirus, what do we mean by that? Well, we obviously don't want to put all of SARS coronavirus into a vaccine, a measles vaccine. We don't want to take it all. What we do using biotechnology is we snip out the part that we are interested in. So whenever you watch the television, we have these cartoons of SARS coronavirus 2. It looks like a sphere and there's all these sticky out bits. The sticky out bits are the spike proteins. And that is the actor. Those spike proteins are the actor that we take from SARS coronavirus, we put it on the stage, and we make measles express or produce that protein from the SARS coronavirus. Why on earth would you want to do that? Why would you want to take a really good vaccine and make it look like a virus which is causing a disease? Well, you want to do that because you want to train the immune system. You want to teach the immune system what SARS coronavirus looks like before the person actually meets the virus in the wild, outside, in Giant Eagle, on the baseball, little league, at the park, wherever that would be, right? Because remember that even though we've done super well in Pittsburgh at reducing the number of people who have the disease is still out there. We're still likely, so we really want to make a vaccine. So the immune system sees that spike protein and it makes antibodies. But because it's a vaccine, it doesn't give you the disease. And that means that the immune system is primed and ready to go if you meet SARS coronavirus in Giant Eagle, at the park, down on the river, wherever you happen to be, or if you travel to different places. So that's the basic principle of vaccination. I've just explained what we do with measles, but there's tons of other ways to trick the immune system into thinking it's already seen the virus.
And I know you've been having so many conversations with medical teams around the world, right? And it's not just a question, it's a race to a vaccine, but you've also talked in our past conversations around the importance of health equity in all of this, right? Because it can't be just a vaccine for some. and how this is the vaccine for those that are most afflicted by it. And we know that data shows that in the United States, that's the Black and Brown community in particularly, and in particular African Americans. So can you tell us more about this? What timing are we looking at? So I know that's really hard to tell us when are we going to get there, but can you share a little bit more on the when and this global effort to address health equity when we are there in this process?
Yeah, so what I gave you is our example, but of course there are so many people working on different vaccines, and the idea that sometimes gets caricatured in the press is this is a big race, that there's only going to be one vaccine. Like, that's not going to happen. Vaccines are products, and they are products that just one person doesn't get. Vaccines have to be given to millions and millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of individuals, right? I think there are, 7 billion of us at the moment? Planet? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of vaccines. That's a lot of manufacturing. So, yes, it's a race in the sense that we want to do it as quickly as possible and we want to get vaccine. Will there be one vaccine? Absolutely not. Is it really good that there are many, many different people in many different parts of the world trying to bring their thinking to making new vaccines? Absolutely. Because the thing that we don't know is what's going to be the best one. The first vaccine might not be the best because we didn't know about coronavirus until the start of this year. We're still really understanding the disease, this transmissible respiratory viral disease. We're understanding how it spreads, what it infects, how long it persists, all of that. And we need to really understand the disease so that we can make the vaccines. So you asked the question, a hard one, because of course everyone's impatient. When are we going to have one? Tony Fauci at the beginning of this year said 12 to 18 months. That is very, very fast. But because we have mobilized the international community, because we're working together, because we're collaborating, because we're not just looking at this part of the world, as important as our part of the world is, but we're looking elsewhere in the world, then we can do things faster than we've ever done before. And in the same way as I say, Salk could not have dreamed about the types of biotechnology we use, Salk also could not have dreamed about the speed that we do this at. And then you get into the really hard conversations, speed and safety. That's an interesting thing that's probably worth exploring.
Terrific. We actually just got a question from one of our attendees. Ravi's asking, following up on the when question, how about the how aspect? What is your assessment of the human challenge trials as a way of accelerating the timeline to a vaccine, and what are the trade-offs?
Yeah, that's a really hard question and an interesting one. At the moment, we talked a lot about how to make the vaccine, what these new vaccines look like. We haven't talked about how we test them, and what I just said was safety. So the process by which vaccines are tested is called phase 1 trial, phase 2 trial, phase 3 trial. And you would have heard this on the news. If you just think about the numbers, the phase 1 trial, small numbers of individuals, maybe up to 50. Phase 2 trials, up to 500, 1,000 people. Phase 3 trials, maybe 30,000 individuals. And all of that's being done to test safety. All of those trials, they start in really healthy people. Why do you want to do those trials in really healthy people? And why do you not want to do challenges of anyone early on? Well, because you have to be certain that the virus, that the vaccine that you're making for the virus is safe. And that's the tension that we have in vaccinology, vaccine development. We have to take the steps slowly. We've traditionally done this A to B to C to D. This is science, right? But we're running a lot of those things side by side at the moment to try and make the whole process faster. The question then is challenge studies. Those are done for some viruses. For example, influenza. People have been challenged with influenza. People are challenged with other respiratory viruses, again, healthy adults. But we have to be really, really careful. And the reason why we have to be really careful thinking about those types of approaches is we on the call have talked about one vaccine. I've already mentioned there's over 150 candidate vaccines in development. The general population just sees vaccines as one thing. And vaccines are really, really important. Vaccines have done so much to keep people alive. And what we have to do is we have to, in the whole development process, make absolutely certain that we don't do something which causes an adverse event. And then that generally undermines the people's general confidence in vaccines. And of course, we know that there's already questions and there's an anti-vaccine movement and all of this.
Right, right. And so many questions on many of those points.
Yep.
Another one from our audience is how you and your team is addressing scalability for the vaccine at this time.
Yeah, so the reason why we are focused on measles is measles has been made as a vaccine for many, many years. There are two opportunities that my laboratory have. We're collaborating with people who use it, and that's funded and supported by CEPI. We're also working together because I'm really passionate about vaccines for all of the world. We're also working together with the Serum Institute of India. That's a company in Pune, towards the south of India. Wonderful company. They make and vaccinate 65% of the world's children. An incredible enterprise. And I've had a collaboration with Serum for many, many years. We've published papers. We've worked with the vaccine that they have. So what we have done is we have used their platform. This is back to the platform analogy. So in this instance now, the platform is the serum vaccine. Then we synthesize the proteins from the coronavirus. And what we've done is we've been able to send that candidate vaccine to India. They have already begun the process of turning that into a product. And the early stages is what they call it a seed stock. So because they can actually do that in the facility where the vaccine would be made, they can make 600 million doses a year. Wow. Right? So that's why it's important. But remember then back to your question about time and who's going to get it when. 600 million people is less than 10% of the world's population, right? And that's, again, this whole idea of we need more than one. So I'm really keen, very motivated to work with partners in the developing world. I'm sure you've read of the problems in Brazil, the number of cases in Brazil, the number of cases in India, the number of cases. Iran was a problem place at the very start where the virus spread really quickly. And it's really important as we consider things for our parts of the world, never to lose sight of the fact that we are all people. We are all equally valuable, and I think that there's a real onus on the scientific community to look beyond Pittsburgh, to look beyond Pennsylvania, beyond the United States, and really see this as a global problem, a pandemic to be sorted out together. I love that sort of stuff. Exactly.
Yeah, that's inspiring, and certainly we have the brightest minds on it, like yourself. And with that, there is a question though in terms of our actual capacity from a manufacturing standpoint. You've spoken to this a little bit in terms of scale, and we have a question from someone, from Mary, about one thing to produce enough for the world's population versus having a working vaccine. Can you speak anything else that you'd like to add to that from a manufacturing standpoint?
Well, one of the things that the Gates Foundation has talked about is basically building factories that may not be used, because again, remember whenever I said typical vaccine development is A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D, and you know that E is the factory and you line the factory up. But the factories, you just don't start making vaccines overnight. It's a really complicated process. It's highly regulated. It has to be done really well. So we need the capacity, and that's why Gates is talking about building additional capacity, additional factories. The other thing that's really important to remember is this came, as someone who's really interested in emerging infectious diseases, this came out of the blue, right? We still have to make the measles vaccine. We still have to make the mumps vaccine. We still have to make the human papillomavirus vaccine, and we still have to make zoster, and we still have to make the influenza seasonal vaccine.
Right.
So there's a certain level of capacity that you have. And we can't then say, all right, COVID is here. We've got a new vaccine. We want to make it. Let's stop making flu. Right? That's not a good choice, right? Because we know that even though the flu vaccine is not perfect, it's far from perfect, but it's a decent enough vaccine by and large that helps us reduce the amount of flu. So it's a really good question about manufacturing, and that certainly it's built into the development process in a way in which it's never been built into the development process before.
To that end, also, when we think about like standardizing practices, you alluded earlier to the fact that there are still individuals who don't believe in vaccines and will opt out. So I am curious to what degree you want to share some thoughts on that, as well as another question that we have in the long run. Do you anticipate that the measles platform could be integrated into routine childhood immunization programs, or do you think that this and other existing candidates are better suited towards immunization campaigns targeting adults during outbreaks? And then a follow-up to that is, to what extent are those possibilities affected by recent results suggesting that naturally acquired antibodies may last only 2 to 3 months?
Oh, wow. That's a
big one. Jessica.
That's about 5 questions at once. Let's make sure I capture them all, Betty, so you can help me make sure that I remember them. Yet the last one first. Again, this is a virus that we have only known of in the last 6 months, 5 months. We're learning about the antibodies. We're learning about the persistence of the antibodies, and we're keeping a very close eye on that. So, for example, all of the tests that we have developed in CVR, Centre for Vaccine Research here, allows us to really do these serological surveys and look at waning immunity. The challenge that we have is we don't have a coronavirus vaccine for people, right? There's seasonal coronaviruses that have spread and cause disease year on year, and they circulate. They're certainly not as virulent. They don't cause as much disease as what we're seeing with COVID. But we haven't made vaccines for those things. In fact, it's really interesting. We haven't made a vaccine for the first SARS coronavirus 1, which appeared in China. We never ever got a vaccine to market for that one. There's another coronavirus, MERS, coronavirus Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. We still don't have a vaccine for that. So it's really challenging because we just don't know. If you were to ask me to guess, I would imagine that we will probably vaccinate people yearly with it once we have a vaccine.
And adults and youth just the same, not
exactly, yeah. And that's what I mean about the first vaccine may not be the one that we end up using, right? Salk's vaccine was first, but the one that we used to push poliovirus to eradication was the Sabin vaccine, okay?
Interesting.
But what's really interesting, and again, I'm just trying to connect us back in history because history is really important. We started with Salk, we used Sabin, but what we're doing in the end game for poliovirus is we've gone back to Salk because it's an inactivated vaccine, and it's for many reasons, biological reasons, it's the one that we should use to eradicate it. That's why having more than one option is really important. So that covered how often are we going to vaccinate, and will the antibodies last? You also asked me about
adult versus children, which you spoke to. The other question is around anti-vaxxers and folks that don't believe.
Yeah, this is a really hard one because the virus that I worked on, and I saw this in the UK whenever I had to deal with measles being linked with autism. The person who's synonymous with that in the United Kingdom is a guy called Andy Wakefield. And he published this infamous Lancet paper, which has been retracted, and people tried to repeat the studies. And, you know, the beauty of science is not perfect, right? Because it's carried out by people who are not perfect. But science is self-correcting. Reproducing data, reproducing results in different laboratories around the world is really important. It's validated by other individuals in other places. What you really don't want to do is you don't want to put something into the scientific literature, an experiment you've done, that you've repeated, and nobody else can replicate it. And no one could replicate that Wakefield study. In fact, it has been retracted. It's been pulled out of the literature. But what happens is you get this conspiracy theory type of approach where if we don't trust authority, and if we question authority, and if we do our own research, and you know, what does doing our own research mean? Does it mean going to Google? If you go to Google, how do you validate the search? How do you weigh up the difference between this piece of writing on Google versus this piece of writing on Google? Who wrote it? Are they a doctor? Have they been a person involved in vaccine development? Or are they someone who has a large platform, an actress, right? Someone from Hollywood, but who isn't actually a medical doctor? And the challenge that the public have, and I really feel sorry for the public because it's so difficult to be inundated with all of this information. Moms and dads want to do the absolute best thing for their kids, right? Mm-hmm. We know that if people are asked to vaccinate their children, people want to think, am I doing the right thing? And that's the tension that you have. But right. What we know from all of the data is vaccines work. They're super safe.
Right. Let's pull back again to the global lens. We've had a number of questions coming in, and just a reminder to everyone who's joining us, please keep them coming. Please use the chat feature to do so. So I'm going to combine two other questions. One is on the Immunology Institute of Cuba. If you know if there's any collaboration with other countries happening there. One of our attendees visited that center and thought they are doing amazing work. The other question is around, it seems that Oxford has made great strides here to be the first commercially available vaccine, some say by August. So what are your expectations? And again, how is this what you're seeing around the world, whether it's in Cuba or elsewhere? What do you think we need to know?
Yeah, so I don't know about the institute in Cuba, but what I do know is there are many places around the world where there will be equivalently great institutes, really creative scientists. You know, that's the beauty of science. It really is an international discipline, from Cuba to Colombia, from the United States to the European Union, from India to Indonesia. You know, it's a really big world of science, and different parts of the world are different resources, but it doesn't mean that the people are in any ways more creative because they're resourced a little bit better because we have a bigger budget, for sure. So that's one thing I would say about the work as far as the Cuba Institute is concerned. I'm sure it's really, really well worth looking at. And again, I know India is the one that I know. It's these people have phenomenal manufacturing capabilities. The second question was
in Oxford, the pace of Oxford for a commercially available vaccine by August. What your expectations
This would be really, really fast. And again, it has to be licensed, it has to be made. And one of the things I think is really important for people to understand, and whenever someone comes onto the television and says, we have a vaccine, no one has a vaccine. Even Oxford do not have a vaccine. They have a candidate vaccine which is going through the process of preclinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, licensure, post-licensure checking, right? The nice thing about the Oxford one is it's a virus which is called adenovirus. So we talked a little bit about measles virus being the platform. Now, if you forget about measles being the platform, now think of adenovirus being platform. The concept is exactly the same. Here's adenovirus. Instead of measles, which looks like a ball, adenovirus has these spiky bits coming out of it. Adenovirus has bits of the coronavirus in it. So whenever that adenovirus infects a person, it produces the coronavirus proteins, and then we make antibodies. What's really nice about the study from Oxford is that we know that it works in non-human primates, right? We know that it's been tested in an animal model. We know that it's in phase 1 now and phase 2, moving quickly to phase 3. And we know that they have really been thinking about manufacturing. So all of those bits of the jigsaw puzzle are coming together. August is pretty soon. If they are able to produce something and get it licensed by August, that would be absolutely really amazing. But remember, they're still not going to have lots and lots of doses of that vaccine. It's not a vaccine until it's licensed, and it's not a product until we make tens of millions of doses. But the nice thing about the adenovirus from Oxford is we can grow it and we can make lots of it for sure.
Great. Another question that ties to when we're talking about Oxford and where it's situated, and the Institute in Cuba and where it's situated. Another question that's come up is, since the U.S. doesn't have a national healthcare system, might this impede the process for the states, and are other countries better equipped to effectively vaccinate their populations? Is a question that we received from Ron.
Yeah, and I actually noticed that Ron also there was a follow-up question to the polio virus thing. So let me just mention that, because he flags a really important organization, the Rotary. Rotary did an amazing work getting polio virus vaccines and supporting that international effort. There's another good example, right? I said science is international, Rotary International. Doing stuff together is great, right? Seeing the fact that we are not just this isolated place, but we are part of a global community. And actually then that speaks to the question that you just asked. Community is so important.
Right.
No one should be disadvantaged. No one should have unequal access, in my opinion, right? This is me coming from the United Kingdom. We have the National Health Service. It's not perfect, but this ability to make sure that people who are on the margins of society, sometimes through fault of their own, sometimes through absolutely no fault of their own, right? But let's think about kids. No kid should miss out on getting a vaccine because of where they were born, what their mom and dad does, what their dad does, what their grandparents do, whoever's looking after them, right? Nobody should miss out on something like that. And I think that if we look at the amount of public money that we as a country are spending on developing these vaccines, it is morally, intrinsically part of us as a society paying our taxes to develop and push these things forward through the CARES, through the funds, through the government, through the money that's been borrowed, whatever. It's morally essential for us to make sure that there is equal access to vaccines in this country, no matter where you're from, north, south, east, west, black, brown, white, Asian, wherever you're from, you should have that access. And I think the same is true in the rest of the world. That's why I'm really interested in working with Serum Institute of India, because we have to get this in our minds that every life, every person has this equal meaning, equal value, equal worth, equal purpose, and trying to see us as privileged people who should jump to the front. There's just something that just doesn't sit well with me about that in terms of how I see the world.
You're here. And I think that's such an important point around collaboration and how it takes all of us. We can't just leave it to the scientists, to the doctors. We can't just leave the policy changes that need to happen just to the policy makers, but how we come together as a whole. Thankful for the Rotary and the important work they do, and other partners, community organizations, international, locally, and it's how it's going to take all of us. Are there any other reflections on what we can do right now, both from maintain distancing, wear our masks, other kind of call to action that you would say to anyone who's tuning in today on, if they're not a scientist or a policymaker, what can they do to be helpful in this moment?
Yeah, I think everyone on the call that we have, right, everyone might not be a scientist or a policymaker or involved in healthcare, but we're all part of the community, right? I started in Pittsburgh. Whenever we got the virus here, I went on the local news to explain why we brought the virus in to work in the laboratory. That's my responsibility as a scientist, to explain to the city why we want to do that work. I think that understanding and recognizing community is so, so important. Whichever part of the community that you're in, and that's why I have a responsibility to our community to explain why we're working on the virus, what we're doing. This is why I think that being part of this conversation is really important. And I really commend your organization for bringing me together with people who I might never meet. I just don't know who the people are on this call, but I just also then commend the people on the call who come and learn and listen and think and understand that scientists are not these people who are here and they can't be questioned, and that what we say is right. I already said we are very comfortable with science being self-correcting. So I just would say we're all part of the community. We're all in this together. We're part of the community in the United States. I'm obviously not from the United States. I'm so glad to be working here. It's a real privilege to be working in Pittsburgh and in this country. But I never, ever lose sight of the fact that this is the world. Vaccines are a social contract. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Vaccines for people who can be vaccinated reduce the burden of disease. Mm-hmm. Vaccines for measles for people who can be vaccinated reduce the likelihood of this one kid or this older person or this individual who had to be given a kidney transplant or has an immune suppression. This person can't be vaccinated. These 3 people can't be vaccinated. These millions of people can. If these millions of people in this community get vaccinated, the likelihood that these 3 individuals who have equal meaning, value, and worth as all this lot, but just can't be vaccinated, the likelihood that they meet the disease is less, and the likelihood that they live, they thrive, they contribute in their, wherever they end up in the world, whatever they end up doing, that's the sort of stuff that matters. So society matters, community matters, doing stuff together matters, and that's, for me, obvious, but
critical, right? Couple last questions here.
Yes.
I want to wrap up with the WHO, right? And there's obviously been lots of conversation and perceptions and tensions and realities around the role of the WHO. And one of our questions is, how will the WHO, the World Health Organization's role and influence change if the US severs ties and withdraws its people and funding?
Yeah. I mean, again, what I've said in our conversation often is no one's perfect, right? You know, let the first person who has no, who is perfect, throw that stone, right? the World Health Organization is not perfect, right? But neither is any country in the world, our country or my home country or wherever in the world. And there's no one is perfect. And I think that in some situations in life, in many situations in life, we always should look for the good. And we always should imagine that the people in the World Health Organization, the people in CDC, the people in NIH, the people in all of these organizations are not purposefully coming to work to do a bad job. Right. They want to do their best. They may not make the best decisions all the time, but there's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Is that, do you say that thing? No. Does that mean anything? No.
That expression? Yes, I've heard that.
Okay. I sometimes say these things and think, do you know what? Nobody in the States says this. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, the WHO did this wrong, so therefore we're just going to run away from it. I just think that that's strange. I think it's strange for a place which has so much to offer, has so much creative science going on, you know, right. Has a history in vaccines. Look at Salk, saving polio, measles, mumps. These are all American generated. They came from this country. Let's lead, let's show, let's be part of stuff rather than run away.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the message on collaboration and how we all have a voice and should raise that, whether it's to our local elected officials or multiple ways to show support and encouragement for this collaboration. I want to close with, we're a little bit over time, but I do want to hear from you on your personal story. You're from Northern Ireland and you made your journey to Pittsburgh, and I'm curious as to how those roots have shaped who you are today and what you'd like to share about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way to finish, and we don't need to go into the great detail, but certainly I was born and brought up in a society which was super divided. And I think that in a society where the other, for us it was Protestants and Catholics, right? That was our tribes, our tension in the simplest sense, right? Demonizing the other and not realizing that the other was a person first led us into a bad place. We had conflict for many, many years because of division. And I think that what we should do as a society is, again, look at where we are at the moment and look at this polarization. And having lived in a place where we had extreme polarization, extreme separation, right, extreme differences between people, that led to the most awful events. How did we solve it? Do we have a perfect peace? Did we have a perfect agreement? No. But did going forward and signing an agreement, again, look at the United States, right? You asked about the United States' role in the WHO. The United States played a big role. Bill Clinton, many presidents played a big role in helping to facilitate resolution in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. And that could only be done by not being separate, but by being together and recognizing, you know what? Yeah, I really disagree with you on this thing. I absolutely disagree with you. But you're a person and you actually could be my friend, even though we fundamentally disagree with people. That's a really important thing that I learned growing up in Northern Ireland. We have to come to a point where we can civilly disagree. Disagreement's great, right? Disagreement is provoking, it thinks, it helps us argue, it helps us defend our position, right? But we don't have to win at any costs, because winning is actually not always the most important thing, and it certainly was not the most important thing in Ireland.
Right. There's nothing wrong with a healthy debate. It helps move us forward, but we need to be able to listen and to...
Yep, exactly. And that's where, if we're so far away from each other and we operate in social media, as opposed to in society, if we operate on in the internet as opposed to in community with each other, what you lose is you lose the richness of a Northern Irish person's perspective, a guy, a lady from, well, you live in, your folks are in Miami, but you're from Cuba. You know, you lose that incredible richness of humanity, right? Where people just see things differently, and hearing people's different perspectives. You know, look at my place, right? You see my color, right? This is my center. I changed it. I made it a little bit brighter. There's just something so amazing about color and about diversity and difference and all of the richness that we get, rather than just having this monochromatic, grayscale world where we sit in our own comfort zones. We don't get challenged. Like, what do you lose? People who I love are some of the most disagreeable individuals that I've ever met. But you know what? They're my best friends. And they've taught me a lot. And I've learned from them. And I'm hoping that they learn from me as well.
Well, here's to more listening to one another and learning and growing and sharing together in this critical moment in our history in ways that I don't think any of us ever expected. Perhaps you've been preparing it for this moment throughout your whole journey and all the important work that you do. But thank you again, everyone who joined us here today. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul Dupré, for all that you're doing and for choosing Pittsburgh. We're so thankful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for facilitating this. I'm looking forward to you visiting us at some stage whenever we don't have to do this anymore, but we can shake our hands and say hello in real life. And I really also would like to say I appreciate the folks who listened in. We are at the Centre for Vaccine Research. I tweet as 10Qs if anyone's interested in what we're doing on Twitter, and we're pretty easy to find on the internet. So thank you for listening.
Terrific. Thank you. Have a great one. Be safe, everyone.
All the best.